Hi everyone! Hi everyone, I'm Christopher Epling. Welcome to the Art Workshop. This is episode 50, The Joy of Painting. It's been a joy, true joy, to work on the Art Workshop here on Pike TV for so long. Can't believe 50 episodes in now. If this is your first time watching the show, we'd like to welcome you. We're going to be learning some art techniques today, specifically with paint. If you've watched the show before, we really appreciate you tuning back in. It's a wonderful just experience to be able to create art with you. And what you're going to need at home is some brush, and a few brushes, some acrylic paint, and a canvas. This is a pre-stretched canvas that's already been primed. We're going to be working on a wet-on-wet medium with this, so that means that there's already been an application of white paint. We're going to be talking a little bit today about Bob Ross and his life and his career. Now, Bob Ross actually started back in 1983, and he's known for his fast and easy wet-on-wet painting technique. He reached millions of art lovers with his popular television program, The Joy of Painting. Ross's instructional program, The Joy of Painting, premiered in 1983 on PBS. Then it became just so popular that it ran for more than a decade, attracted millions of viewers. The Joy of Painting would eventually be carried by more than 275 stations. Fortunately, we lost Ross back in 1995. The majority of his original oil paintings were donated to charities or PBS station. Today, Ross remains one of the most well-known and highest-paid American painters. A lot of folks actually enjoy onto YouTube and just playing his videos and listening to his gentle demeanor, as I said earlier, and how he approaches painting, and he makes it seem so simple. Now, I am not a Bob Ross certified instructor. Wearing this wig does not make me one at all, and having the canvas here with me and the paint, we're going to learn together. We're going to do something a little different, though, than Ross did. Ross worked with oil painting, and oils are very easy to work with if you know how to, but it includes a pretty dangerous element with oil painting, which is linseed oil or paint thinner. I don't want to really encourage paint thinner being used. We have a lot of students that watch the art workshop, so we're going to try our best to replicate a Bob Ross style environmental type landscape painting with acrylic. Now we can do that very easy. We just need to apply it in a different way. So let's get ready. Thanks again for tuning in, and let's start to paint together. So as I said earlier, we have a pre-stretched canvas. And what I've done is I've actually went in and I've painted over top of this with a white glaze. And we're going to be using a series of brushes, including one of Bob Ross's favorite brushes, which is a 2-inch angled brush. And this is mostly known for painting like homes or exterior type environmental stuff. So we're going to be using this though. And I'm going to show you how Bob Ross used it. Other types of brushes we're going to be using fan brushes and also some square-edged flat brushes. So these are the tools that you're going to need. Now Ross also used a scraper for his oils, which he would take and actually apply the white into certain elements. And we're going to try to do that with acrylic paint. It should work pretty much the same way. Acrylic is a different composition than oil paints and pigments, but it should work just fine. Now the colors that I'm going to be using, a range of colors, and we're actually going to be putting these on the screen for you so you can see. Some of the colors include light green, leaf green, raw umber, burnt sienna, true yellow, sky blue, titanium white, and even a little bit of pink in there too, just for fun. So let's go ahead now and we'll take our canvas and we're going to actually prime it just a little more because we want our canvas to be nice and wet. So I'm going to be using a number 30 flat-edged brush to apply just a very thin coat of white over top of it. Now, what can start to happen if you're not careful with your canvas is that how you apply this paint in the beginning really impacts the pigment later on. Notice I'm going from left to right. Really easy, applying the paint, just getting a nice coat of white on there again. This base coat of white will help us with our acrylic to move that paint around. So you at home, if you have a pre-stretched canvas ready and you've got some paint, go ahead and start to prime it just like I am. Now remember, none of us are professionals here. We're having fun together, learning and building and creating art. All right, so there we go. Nice coat of white. Now before I really get deep into painting, I'm actually going to go ahead and, although I love the wig, I think I'm going to take it off, and I think we can still get the element and feel of Bob Ross without it. Okay, so that's a little better now. I really respect and admire Bob Ross, and as we approach this painting together, let's all remember to stay within his attitude towards painting, which was fun. There's no mistakes. Everything that we do together today is a learning experience. So let's get started. What I have here is the base coat for the white, and I'm using back with this sturdy brush, and I'm pulling out now my pigments. What I want to do with this is pull a little bit of this sky blue out, just a little bit, and get it right on the edge of your brush. Mix this with a little titanium blue together here. Gives us a little bit darker pigment. Blending colors with acrylic as opposed to white, you want to make sure and keep an even pigment transition from your colors. So when I start to add, notice how I'm pulling around and getting the tip of my brush with the paint, and go ahead and mix it right on the palette. And once I feel that I have the color that I like, go ahead and take your brush and just put a few marks on the canvas. Don't worry about making any mistakes. There are really no mistakes with this. We're learning together. So we're putting a little bit of blue. Notice how I'm making these dashes going down on the canvas. What I'm wanting to do is just get the pigment on there. Once I've applied a little bit, I can actually take now my brush and start to move it inward like this. Even strokes back and forth. And what we want to do is to see this color start to transition. You'll see it on the canvas slowly start to transition. Try to be even with things, so be sure and try to make even strokes. Notice how I'm pulling it down now, the blue. Do the same thing on this side. I'm just going to pull this color in. If you notice that it's starting to get a little bit dry on the edges, and that's what happens a lot with acrylic paint. When that happens, you just get a little bit of water on your brush. Get it on the canvas just lightly. Place the brush in an even angle again. We want this to come out and sort of match each side with the same types of strokes we're putting into it. You may have to turn your brush flat like this and go ahead and pull it across that way. Our goal is to move this pigment across the canvas in even strokes. Now go ahead and pull it all the way in the middle. Don't worry about there being any types of mess ups. There's no mess ups here. We're just having fun. What we would like to do is start to see this blue resemble, if we can, a sky. Alright, that should be good. We're going to come back in a little bit and add a little more to this. Acrylic paint dries pretty fast, so having a little bit of water nearby to keep the pigment moist and your canvas a little moist is a good idea. So you'll notice every so often I'll put the brush down and get a little bit more water, and when that happens, it's just to get this pigment wet again on the canvas so we can pull it down in the areas we want it in. Now notice how I've just went on the edges here, both sides, and I'm pulling inward. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to pull a little bit more of that blue, the same color. We're actually going to put that on the bottom this time. I'm going to pull a little bit more of this titanium blue and a little bit of white. Notice how I'm mixing right here on my palette. And just remember now, there's no mistakes with this. Down in the corners of each side of the canvas, go ahead and put some lines in here too. We want to basically do the same effect with the paint as the top. We're going to do it on all four sides of the canvas. To make hashes, just get the paint on the canvas first. You don't have to worry about making it blend all together at first, so just want it on there. So now what we're going to do is go ahead and blend these colors in back and forth on our canvas. Even strokes all the way to the center. All the way to the center. Notice how I'm twisting my brush ever so often, because what happens is you can actually see the canvas, the pores of the canvas, even when it's been primed. And basically what prime means is that you've went in already and put that white coat of acrylic paint down. those pores will show through. When you see those pores, that means you need to put a little more paint there, just like right here on the side, and pull it all the way down. Now you want your center to be white, of course, so this gives the effect of that, of the sky. Okay, so see how this center is white. Now we're going to be a little brave now. We're actually going to go ahead and pull a little bit of this pink. Just on the tip of my brush, I'm going to pull a little bit of this pink out. I'm actually going to go ahead and put it right in the center, right here. Just go ahead and put it on there. There are no mistakes of where you place it. Notice it's a very light pink. I'm getting that effect by just getting a little bit on the edge of my brush and going in and putting it on there. Boy, that's beautiful, isn't it? I love to see those colors transition. When you do it just right on a canvas, you can see things start to come to life a little bit more. I don't know if any of you have ever seen a sunset or a sunrise that looks like this, but if you ever do, you'll remember it. Those pretty pinks and purples and different colors that come out. And the sun does some beautiful things sometimes when it sets or rises. All right, we have our atmosphere on there pretty good. We have a nice thin coat of paint, and we're going to be a little more brave now. We're actually going to go ahead and put some more deeper hue now in here. So we've got our first layer of pink, and now we're going to go back in again. And notice what I'm doing. I'm going right over top of where I was already, just with the edge of my brush, and I want to get some more pigment on there. I want it to be nice and full of color. I don't know if you've ever watched Bob Ross before, but the way that he brings a canvas to life is amazing. It's astonishing, really. And he's done over 30,000 paintings in his career. We're going to do one today together, so we'll be lucky if we can, right? We're going to give it our best shot. All right, so we got that nice coat of pink on there. See how it transitions a little bit down. What we want to do is get our brush clean now. If you have some water nearby, then just get the brush a little clean, and we're going to actually pull some different colors coming out here. We're going to grab some darker colors, and if you have paint at home, your basic colors, you can do everything with your basic colors. You really don't need much, but I'm going to pull some violet in here. Now watch what I'm going to do. I'm using a flat brush. It's a little thinner, and I'm just going to go across the top here, and I'm going to start pulling down. Notice my strokes that I'm putting in here. I'm going to pull downward all across the back of the painting here, moving to the side. There's no right or wrong way to apply this, so don't get frustrated if it doesn't look exactly like what I'm doing. Blend it with your brush. The more that you move your brush back and forth, the more you'll get the blending. And these are going to be rolling mountains across the back of their painting. As long as we can get the first coat down, we see where this goes, and we can move in from there and keep going. There we go. Right across the back. Now, those of you at home that have jasmine or a light colored purple, you can do this too, but you have to blend it. And if you've already primed your canvas, it shouldn't be too hard to do that. Now oil works a lot different than acrylic. With oil, we could actually go in and move the paint around and make scratches and things like that. You can still scratch and do things on a canvas with acrylic paint, but it's a little more different application than oil. All right, we have one rolling mountain going across the back now. What we want to do is we want to keep this light at first, and we're going to go from light to dark. That's the main point, is go from light to dark with your paintings. Now what I'm going to do is going to go in, I'm going to pull a little bit of this Prussian blue. It's a very, very deep color blue, if you can see. It almost looks black. And I'm going to pull this color in, and I'm going to mix it a little bit with my jasmine, mixing everything right here on the palette. And I'm actually going to pull now downward, just like this. You can see what starts to happen now. We're going to pull our brush across the canvas and go down with it, just like that. Flat brushes are really easy to use. You can put them to the side like this and get a nice thin line, or you can put it on its side and get this nice big fat line. So it depends on what you want to do really with the painting. So this is another little mountain here, little hill we have in the distance. The great thing about painting things in the distance, if you don't have to put too much detail in there, all you need to do with it is just go across your canvas evenly and get a nice blending of colors. Now, I'm going to use a different type of instrument here. We're going to pull out the round brush, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to pull this color down some. So you can see what I'm doing here. I'm pulling straight down with my brush. I'm going up into the acrylic, and I'm pulling down. And it really, when you're working with acrylic as opposed to working with oil, you have to be a little careful, because what can start to happen is the paint will dry on you, and it will dry right there really fast. It dries a lot faster than oil does. And when that starts to happen, you want to be sure and keep some water nearby. So those of you at home that's following along with me, be sure and keep some water nearby as you go across and work with your canvas. I'm going to be a little brave. I'm going to go ahead and jump in here with another flat brush, and I'm going to actually go ahead and put some real nice detail down here at the bottom. And what you want to do is start on the edge, and you can see how dark this is going to be. And we're going to pull this straight across, and we're not going to worry about where we place it. We're going to go straight across just like this. Mixing a little bit of jasmine in there, because this is actually going to turn into an island. This is going to be our island, and we're going to put some trees on there, some happy little bushes and other little things across our island. So making a straight line, as straight as I can go. Now we're going to do something a little different coming up. We're going to actually start to pull this paint downward. So we get a nice little layer here going across. Now what we're going to do is get our brush just a little wet. Not too wet, just a little wet. And we're going to pull down, straight down, all across the canvas. We're actually going to use a little bit thicker brush for this one. Should work a little bit better. There we go. Straight down. Now if you have any trouble with blending, remember to try to keep your brush wet. That helps a whole lot. I usually keep a spray bottle nearby even. And I'll go out from the canvas a little bit and give it a nice little splash of water. This helps us to pull this down now better. If you have oil paint at home and you have some turpentine-based oil thinner, then you can really get in there and start to pull out some detail. Acrylic paint's just so much different than oil, but we can still make a landscape painting with it. You see, I'm just pulling straight down now, all across the canvas. Straight down. Once you do that, go back across it, pulling that pigment, making it nice and even. Now, we got the basis for our little island here we're going to be using. Okay, some series of mountains, a nice sunset in the back. What we want to do now is start to go inside to our painting, and we're going to put some darker color to formulate our little island. I'm going to pull some burnt sienna, a little bit of burnt sienna. I'm going to pull some of this blue too. I really want to keep a nice consistency with what I'm putting on the canvas. And what you're going to do now is you're going to start over here on the side, and you're actually just going to start to make a few marks. Now, don't get overwhelmed whenever you start to do this. It's going to intimidate you a little bit at first. Just like Bob Ross says, there's no mistakes. I'm using a round brush, and I'm actually going to go in now, and I'm going to start to form some trees over here on the side. I'm using burnt sienna and a little bit of Prussian blue and a little bit of violet. I like to have consistency with my work. I like to see a lot of colors that blend and go across the canvas. There we go. Now notice I'm very light with my work. Make this a big tree. I go very light to dark every time that I work on a painting, and that's what I'd like to see you do at home too. Go light to dark. I'm going to put a few more little trees here. Our little island might have a few more trees. Let's make a line starting where you want your tree, and then you just bring your brush out, fan it out, going down on each side. Make sure to be a little consistent. But you don't have to be too consistent, because we want this to look as if it's just been thrown onto the canvas and we've established a little island out of nothing. Nothing was here before we started painting. That's what I love about painting. You start with a blank canvas, and you can then start to build on top of that whatever it is you want, whatever's in your mind. So we have a few trees here, and I'm going to pull some more burnt sienna and a little bit of tinge of burnt umber in here too, just a little bit. Don't want to use too much of burnt umber. It can really be overwhelming if you do. I'm going to start to put a little bit of some shrubs down here at the bottom on our little island. Just a few marks. You don't have to be too consistent with this. You can place it on there however you like, really. Put that all across the bottom. Take your brush and just move it back and forth, making little X's as you go across. Pull it out to a point where you stop, and then pull the brush all the way back across, blending in those colors more. Just like that. Now once we have this, what we want to do is we want to go in while it's still wet. We're going to pull another brush out. It's a brush we used before, and we're going to actually get it wet, just a little bit wet, and we're going to pull down on this. We want the effect of a reflection in the water. And in a second, we're going to straighten up that line so that it looks as if it's just coming straight off the canvas. Now, of course, here we're going to have to blend those trees in, so this will actually look a little different in a minute. The trees will have to blend into the water. Remember, a little island here. There we go. Start to blend those colors in. Move your brush back and forth real lightly across the canvas, barely tipping it. If I was to let go of this brush, it would just fall out of my hands. I just want a very light blend to these colors, right across, just like that. Okay, I have a little island here now, and what we're going to do is we're going to be really brave, and we're going to go over here on the side, and we're going to pull some more of that Prussian blue out, and more burnt sienna, and a little bit of burnt umber. And we're actually going to be really brave, and we're going to put a giant tree on this side. Starting at the top, just make a line like this, straight down, and then use your brush, tilt it on its side, and just start to come out. You have to tilt it on the side so that you're using just the tip of your brush. You can see how this is much darker now, because we're actually moving a little closer to your perspective. If you were standing on this shoreline looking out, you may notice that the horizon is a lot lighter than what's in the foreground. So if I used a little thicker brush, we'd probably do this a little faster, but we're okay. We'll keep going. Remember to keep it a little wet if you need to. Acrylic paint's so much different than oil. Oil paint will stay wet for a long time. Acrylic paint, not so much. Acrylic paint likes to dry pretty fast. It's in a hurry. Acrylic paint is not waiting around for nobody. Now you notice what's starting to happen here is as I'm pulling this down, you're going to see other colors from the background starting to pop out more. The reason for that is I keep the canvas a little wet. That lets us work with oil acrylic as if it were oil. So you can actually go in and make these little changes to things using paint that's already on the canvas. So now notice how the tree's starting to, as it comes down, as we get closer to the bottom, we're getting a little thicker now. So just make these giant swaps in there with your brush. It's okay. Be brave with it. Don't worry. Bob Ross was a professional, and he did a lot of good by sharing his talent with the world. And it's so wonderful that we can go now and just open up our browsers and click for tutorials by Bob Ross, and we have a wealth of information to come up. All right, we've gotten closer down now to the bottom of where our tree is. And what we want to do now is we want to extend this downward so that this entire lower portion of our painting is actually this little island here that we have stuck off to the side. So you can see what I've done on my palette. It's a little messy, but I'm pulling a little bit of this violet, a little bit of Prussian blue, a little bit of burnt umber, and I'm mixing these together. Same colors as what we used over here on the tree. You can see I'm putting a little more detail now into the side, and you can actually see how this starts to work. It's the same color, but before we actually go forward, we're going to do something a little different than what we've done before. We're going to go in and pull that same color we've been using, but this time we're using a little bit of light green. Not too much, because this can really overwhelm your entire canvas. The color can just jump right out. So in order to get this at the bottom, you're going to go on top of where you've already painted, and you're just going to make these lines popping out, just like little bushes. Some little bushes down here on the bottom. Don't worry too much about where the bushes live right now. Just focus on getting the lines in there and getting the paint on the canvas. I'm going to move this down. As you go down, you're going to go lower and lower on your canvas as you get closer to the bottom. And that's where we're going to stop, right there. Okay? Now what we need to do is fill this in a little bit more. In order to do that, you're going to go ahead and pull a little more Prussian blue. If you don't have any Prussian blue and all these colors and fancy colors at home, just pull some blue and brown together, mix it with a little bit of red, and go in here and just fill this space up. Fill this space up. We're not going to worry too much about what we can see inside of this space just yet, because when we go back here in a little bit with different brushes, we're going to be able to fill that space up with different colors so it looks like there's actually something there. But right now what we want to do is just get this entire area darkened in by these colors. Use your brush back and forth, making little X's. Just fill that whole area up. Make sure that you get a nice consistency with your pigment. So load it up on your brush nice and heavy. How you do that really is you take your palette and you start to mix these colors. You pull a whole lot out of one color, put it down in the other, and just move it around on your palette. You'll see it starts to actually take form and actually produce a different color. We have what we need here, a little bit of brown. I'm going to go back in now and put a nice little coat of this brown at the bottom, all the way across. Now our background, or our foreground, both look almost where we want it to be before we start adding detail, but in order to get this background fixed up a little bit more, what we're going to do is we're going to actually go in, we're going to take a round brush. So by round, I mean it's got a really sharp tip on it, okay? What you want to do is you want to go in, you want to pull some white out, a little bit of white, twist your brush around, it gets loaded up on there. Go in, and you're going to put a little line going across, just like this. It's okay to have a lot on your brush because we need to actually have a line going across, and if you don't have a lot on your brush, you're not going to get this line. Now what we want to do after we formulate that line going across the bottom is to go back in with our white and do back and forth swipes across the bottom of the canvas, just like this. Back and forth. go ahead and load up more white even and go across on the side here. Now we've got a shadow that's going to pop up on us, these trees here. What we want to do is mix a little bit of white with some Prussian blue, same colors we used to formulate these trees. Go in, back and forth motions. You want to go across the bottom of the palette, of the canvas, sorry. Tell you, acrylic paint dries so fast. You have to be very careful. This entire area up here is pretty much dry now. We're going to pull a little more color. We want to be able to see a shadow in there. Just like that. Go around the back, a little bit of white in here. Get that nice reflection. There we go. All the way across. Now you notice what happens is we've went across our entire backside of our canvas with the blue, and that's fine, but if we want this reflection, we have to pull white and we have to go back into it one more time, just like this, all the way across. There we go. That reflection is really important. Bob Ross was a master with using reflection on water, and it's a really simple technique. You're just moving your pigment across your canvas in a way that will blend. You're just moving it back and forth, making those little X's, keeping your canvas wet. We need some more shadow at the bottom down here. So I'm going to load up some more pigment, get a little bit of white on there, and just make back and forth motions just like that. There we go. Now, is this a Bob Ross painting? No, of course not. But we're both learning together. And I've studied Bob Ross somewhat. I've watched a lot of his shows, and the one thing that I notice about Bob Ross is that he makes everything look really simple, which is actually very complex. And so what we have here is a start to a piece that we could call a landscape painting, but we have a lot of room to grow. So what I'm going to do now is go back into the painting and add the detail. I'm going to start using some more of these colors that I've pulled out in order to show a little more of the detail within the landscape, especially down here in the bottom with our plant life. Okay? So going back into our painting, I really want to work with this area right here some more. I want this darkened in. I want the shadow of the tree to extend all the way out like this. And I'm just moving my brush back and forth, trying my best to grab that shadow so that it's darker down here. The light reflecting coming down is a little darker, right? So that's what we want it to look like. And let's see, a little more white in here. All right, now we need to work on our trees a little bit back here. And what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to pull some more blue, a little bit of green, mix that together. I want to stay a little consistent. Now go in very lightly with the tip of your brush and start to put some little lines in here. So the reflection of the light coming down the side, just like this. There we go. A little bit of green, and we have it. Now, this foreground, where all of our plant life is really needing some help. So what I'm going to do is we use a flat brush, go back in and pull a little more color now. One thing you have to be careful with when you're working with acrylic and you're using white a lot, and you're using actually a like a spray bottle like I'm using, is when you spray, the pigment sometimes can just start running across your canvas. When that happens, you can get serious trouble, because then your entire piece starts to melt together almost. Now we want this to look as if there's a shoreline way back here. What I'm going to do with that, instead of spraying the canvas, I'm going to spray my palette a little bit. And I'm going to pull some more of this true blue, mix it with a little bit of the Prussian blue and a little bit of violet. Notice I'm mixing the same colors. Go back in now and I'm going to make a line using my flat brush. straight across. There we go. Straight across, just like that. So that it looks almost as if there's a shoreline in the background as well. These little tiny lines of blue here and there help to give the effect that there's water here. And that's the wonderful thing about painting. I mean, we really could do anything we wanted. We could do this sunset here near a mountain, rolling hills, or we could go and actually work near the ocean and draw or paint a scene from near the shoreline of an ocean. So it's limitless on what we can do with painting. It truly is, and that's one of the joys of painting: learning together, formulating these things together, and finding out what we can create. Now I'm going to go back up to the foreground, and notice this tree really needs some help. You're going to go in and you're going to load your brush with a little bit of darker blue, mix that with a little bit of green and some burnt sienna all together. I like to keep my palette mixtures with the paint pretty messy because what happens is when you go and actually apply the color, you have a consistency with your brush and your color. So there's not a lot going on where you have a lot of colors that don't blend well or don't stand out. Okay? All right, so what I'm doing, I'm just touching up this shoreline real fast because this particular green, notice it's really dark, is going to help us in a minute, and we're going to actually put some lighter green in here to formulate the plant life at the bottom. We want a little bit of this here on this island too, just a little bit. So we may go across the bottom here with the green, showing a little bit of this green at the bottom, across. Acrylic paint does not blend like oil. It's a lot different than oil, but if you apply it in a certain way, you can get certain effects that resemble oil paintings. That's really what we're trying to do today. It's slightly difficult with acrylic. If you've used acrylic before, you know the way that it applies so much differently. It's a thinner paint. The paint dries faster. It's more water-based, where oil is oil-based. So you have that difference that really impacts a painting. What we have right now is nowhere near Bob Ross, but we can see that this is a setting somewhere. It's a landscape, but there's still more we have to do to it. So what Bob Ross would do at this point would go in and he'd pull some of these lighter colors. He'd start to use a little bit of yellow, a little bit of green, and he'd want to see these different plants at the bottom really pop out more. So we're going to actually go in with a little bit of yellow, a little bit of green, and we're going to just tap our brush across the bottom of our foreground. Okay? Now I'm really not pressing down too hard. I'm actually barely tipping it because I want this to just be applied sporadically and chaotically all throughout this area. Okay? I want this to just pop out and look as if though we're trying to do an abstract painting, which really we are. This is more of a, I'd say, abstract than realism. Traditional painters that are trained to paint landscapes can really pull out some amazing effects. You and I are beginners with painting, so we're going to do our best to pull out what we can. Now notice I put that one layer of green across the top, which blends pretty well, but I want to go ahead and put more color in there. I'm going to use a different brush in a second, and it's going to give us some different effects. So I'm just wanting this coat going across the top, not the bottom. I want the bottom to be darker though, just like this. There we go, right across the edges. As Ross would say, I'm doing happy little trees and bushes here. There are no mistakes, only happy accidents, and that's something we have to remember throughout this process, that there's happy accidents, no mistakes. So I'm pulling some more Prussian blue, some more burnt umber. Now on this point, I'm going to use a little bit of this raw umber as well. That's another pigment that can really make an impact on your blending, so you got to be careful. A little bit of green, a little bit true blue. We're going to use all sorts of colors for this one. We're going to go back in on the back side of this tree now. We're going to go ahead and put a little bit of this bluish green color we've just mixed up. Just a little bit, getting a little more effective. There's shadowing back in here in the back, so we can't really see all that area very well with the light reflecting downward. Now these trees down here really need some help as well, so using the same color, we're going to go back into this. Now this is going to really stand out for a second, but that's what we want. We want it to pull this color and make this a little darker. Just like that, down that edge. You may have a little bit through here. Not very much, just a little bit. And we want this to have a little more color in there. So you can tell this is the same type of tree maybe. There we go. Down at the bottom a little more. All right, and we're going to do the same for this one. Just the edge of your brush, pulling it upward into the paint. Now if this was oil paint, this would be wet still. We'd be able to go in and really blend this, but with acrylic, as I said, it dries so fast on you that you have to really work fast if you're trying to complete a painting as if Bob Ross did within a certain amount of time. You have to really go fast. All right, now I'm satisfied to a point, but I'll be honest, I think we need to work a little more. And I think where we need to go with this is actually back to our round brush. Now, if we wanted the effect of this to be really fuzzy and hazy, we would go in and we'd actually use our brush, a big 2-incher like this, and we'd pull this up and get that pigment going across the canvas. Now, we could have done this on the background, which we've already finished, so we don't want to do that yet. What we want to do is to go back in, and I'm actually going to steal some ideas from Ross. I'm going to pull out a scraper, typically used for oil painting, and I'm going to pull some pigment just on the end of it and scoop it up like that and get a little bit of this and go inside and actually put a little line through here. You can see what starts to happen. You can scrape the paint. You can actually go in and this paint will scrape if you do it correctly, which we want just a little bit of color. Very thin line going across the bottom here. Just a little more dark. We want to see that this is shadow in here, that we've actually went in and pulled the light out ourselves almost, just like that. You can see how that lightens that area up a little more. This area definitely needs some help, so I'm going to return to the round brush now. Now, be sure, as I've said, and keep some water nearby. Water is going to help you tremendously. Go back in and pull a little bit of yellow. Notice the water building up in my palette. That's what I like. When I've done murals before, and when I've worked on murals, I always like to keep my palette nice and messy. So nice and messy is the way to go, always. So if you ever get into a situation where you're starting to say, well, this isn't working right the way I thought it would, just have fun, go in and play around and see what happens. So we're adding a little bit of light green and white and yellow here. And the effect we're wanting is the tips of these little tiny shrubs through here to be a little more light reflecting off of those. And I'm just using a round brush and I'm just going in, I'm barely tipping it down, just barely tipping it. I want this to go all around the bottom here so that we can see that light's coming in. Notice how I'm going below the green that I applied earlier. So there's a separation of color there. There's a separation that we see. That separation helps us to see perspective. Perspective is a big deal with art. If you can't get a certain perspective down, then you're going to have a painting that's more abstract than realism. Now this is a combination, I'd say, between the two. You at home may notice that your painting is starting to take on now a little bit more of a form, and you can see that this is somewhere in your mind. It could exist somewhere in the world, and that's the joy of painting. We can go anywhere we want with painting. We can do anything we want with art. Art is amazing in all of its applications. Now notice I'm going back a little bit, not too much. This whole area right here is going to be a lot of shadow in this area, so we don't want it to be lit up very much. I'm just barely taking my brush across the edge and I'm tipping it down, making these little marks throughout where I go, okay? Now, same thing, light green, a little bit of yellow, a little bit of this blue this time. We're going to use a little bit of blue, the Prussian blue, the dark blue. And we're going to blend this a little more, throw in a little bit of white, not too much white, but a little bit of white, and a little more yellow. And what we're going to have is a darker hue of the lighter green we just applied. We want this darker hue because we're going across the bottom now, and we want this to have a little more texture to it. We don't want it just to be a flat green throughout here. Now the same color we'll use all throughout the bottom. And the neat thing we're going to do is we layer this on. You're layering it. And as you go, you're going to go back and forth with light to dark. And what that will give us is an effect of light coming in. Now we're going to grab some yellow, mix it in with our green, a little bit of white. We should have a lighter hue of that green we just used. And now go across the bottom. This is where we can actually show a little bit of this grass or across the bottom here by using this. I'm using a round brush still, just putting in some different hues of this color across the bottom. I want this to be filled up. I want it to be use all the space that we have, right? We don't want to waste any space. All across the bottom here with their green. Just like that, okay? Go back in, a little bit of yellow, a little bit of white, a little bit lighter this time. This is the area where light can be seen, so we want this to be lit up a little more. Maybe put a couple dashes of this color very lightly with my brush, very lightly. I don't want this area to be lit up, I want it to be darker. Now, once we start moving back into this area, we can have more fun. Notice how I went from light to dark. Light to dark, the whole way. All throughout the process of putting a painting together, you light from dark. Now we have this massive tree on this little knoll. We have a background of painting of mountains. We have our little island here off to the side. Notice the difference though in the color between this type of blue and this lighter blue. And as you go back out into your horizon, you can see how the mountains change. It goes from very hard to see to darker, a little bit darker, and then you're into your foreground. This has all worked really well. You know, as a first attempt at painting a landscape, I think it worked pretty well, but there's one area that I'm not satisfied with. There needs to be some more shadow here on these trees that matches our tree in the foreground. So what I'm going to do is go back in again one more time. I'm going to use another round brush, and I'm actually going to apply a little bit more of the pigment that we use for this tree on the trees in the background, okay? So this is where it gets a little tricky. Do you remember how you mix the colors for that? Well, I can match it as close as I can here on my palette. Now, another thing that I don't want to happen is I don't want this to be too offsetting that we have to redo the entire tree. So I want to be a little careful. Also, these trees in the background are a different hue. So we don't want to completely throw off the consistency of color. But what I can do is go back in, and hopefully this is dried enough to do this now, and go over top of it again with a little more color this time. It's working okay. Acrylic is such a touchy medium to use. Keeping it nice and wet is the key. So if you're at home and you're painting along, keep some water nearby for sure, because with acrylic you're going to need it. You're going to need that water. You're going to need the water really bad. Now again, with that reflection, take your brush, you're going back and forth, making these little lines. Just come out with your brush to form a reflection in the water. And if you do this correctly, going back and forth, if this was still wet, it would be so much easier. But we're learning. We're doing it together. We're creating together. And that is so fun. That was the whole joy and is the whole joy of painting. And I'm sure Bob Ross, if he were here right now, would tell us the same thing. He'd probably also tell me that I need to do some more training with acrylic paint. But I think overall we've done a pretty decent job with trying to capture a landscape. Now with oil, before we close up for today, I do want to show you a couple of things here. If we were painting with our oil paint, what we'd be able to do is to go in and add these little details that Ross was so well known for. He was really well known for using his knife to create shapes. And so before we go, let's try to do a little bit of that, just in honor and memory of such a legend in the instructional art world. Bob Ross will always be a legend. If you have access at home, check out some of his videos on YouTube. So you'd be amazed about what he can do. And literally what time we've used to create our little landscape, Bob Ross would have put together probably Mount Rainier or something. So, but we're going to do the best we can, and we're going to be proud of what we create because there are no mistakes with art. As I've said so many times, and that's what Bob Ross taught me. When I was a child growing up, you know, I watched Bob Ross so many times, and you know, that's the thing that I took away from it the most, was that there are no mistakes with art. And that's what really gets a lot of students turned off with art, is that they start to paint and or draw and they say, well, this doesn't look like so-and-so's painting or artwork or, you know, pencil drawing. Mine is different. I can't do this very well. And the next thing you know, the student has completely given up on art. And that's a tragedy. That's something that we don't want to see happen. We have some of the most amazing creative artists, young artists that I've seen. I've been to over 300 schools from Tennessee, Ohio, and especially in Kentucky. It's down in central Kentucky, all over Kentucky, northern Kentucky. And what I've noticed is that we have here in our region some of the most talented artists, young artists, that I've had the privilege of working with. And to think that some of those students would become discouraged with art is just, in my mind, it's a tragedy. So I don't want to see that happen. So let's all remember that whenever you're painting and you're having fun with paint in art, don't get discouraged. I'm gonna leave this today and say, you know what, I gave this painting my best go, and I'm happy with how it turned out. Could this have been better? Absolutely. Would I have rather tried to maybe use oil? No, because oil is so hard to use. Anyone who's worked with oil before knows that oil is just so tremendously hard to use. I'm just putting a little more detail in before we close up, putting a little more shadow here in the water, just getting these lines just a little more detailed. If we had more time, we could go back into this forefront area, maybe put some more detail in there, larger brush strokes. For the areas that are closer to you, and so on and so forth. But thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed this special 50 episodes. It's amazing. I can't believe it. It's been a joy to work with Pike TV, and it's been a joy to be able to do this, and we appreciate you so much. So if you've went along with us today and did your landscape, and please send it in to me. You can email that to me at eplingillustrations@gmail.com. I would love to share it here on the show. We would be so proud to do it, and I'm sure you probably did a better job than I could. But acrylic paint, I'll give it a 7 out of 10 for a medium, especially with doing this style of painting. And we'll just move on and keep trucking. So thank you so much for tuning in. We appreciate you. Commemorative Bob Ross, an amazing legend in the art world. We hope we've done some justice to his legacy here today. And you be well, and remember, always keep drawing. Until next time, I'm Christopher Epling. Thank you.